Hello and hey, today we're going to be messing around with Path of Exile, this time going over my champion Impale Shrapnel Ballista build. This was the build that I took down the Awakener on, and the skill that I started the league with. This unassuming Ballista totem starts as a pea shooter and ends up as a destructive flak cannon. For that reason I can't really recommend leveling strictly with it, but as someone who has now done it twice, it's manageable, but definitely won't be for everybody. Even with the people that are previously open to totems, it feels pretty rough. Your totems don't pack that much power, they'll die quickly in boss fights, and you may even ask yourself why the hell you're playing this skill until you get some of your most impactful uniques. And so again, for that reason, I would say the budget floor, yikes, for this build is a couple of exalts, and probably after you've already leveled with something else. So that's where we'll go ahead and start it. When it comes to the items, there are a great many host of options for you to choose from, but here are some of my personal recommendations. For a weapon, a 6-link chin soul will give us great flat physical damage, but we can get that anywhere. The real draw is the 50% more damage at close range. Anything within 20 units, which are smaller than you might think, is getting absolutely shredded. The downside to that is, of course, the enemies are knocked back in that same range, but of course, we're building around that. Brings us to the glove slot of Empire's Grasp. This glove slot item offers us very little in terms of stats, but if the enemy can be knocked back, it's one of our greatest tools. Being very, very cheap, it's an easy recommendation when using the chin soul for our weapon, and is strictly based on that recommendation. So if you're not using that bow, feel free to use anything else in this slot. The draw of this item is, of course, the Uno card of being able to reverse knockback. And if the enemy is hit with knockback range, it will be drawn in even closer, hopefully allowing it to take additional arrows from the barrel of our shotgun ballistas. The not-so-budget option of this is to corrupt an implicit. The one we really are aiming for is curse enemies with vulnerability on hit. This requires an eye level of 60 to make yourself and should be about a 1.25% chance if they aren't weighted. And I got mine in about 120 tries, so it may be more efficient to just buy it, but I haven't seen any on the market this league. Sticking to the cheaper options, in the head slot, one of your best options is going to be a Sarkonjas, I'm not entirely sure how to say that helmet, I apologize. But this is not a requirement of the build. It's generally a very cheap helmet, and it gives us a lot of offensive firepower as well as a nice chunk of life and dexterity, which will go a long way with our accuracy issues, which again, I'll touch on in a bit. But because Sarkonjas are also one of the most enchanted items in the game, it won't be too hard to find one with a Shrapnel Ballista, fires an additional arrow enchant. Though that will come with a cost. It's nothing crazy, of course, but higher life ones can jump that price up quite a bit. And if price is an issue for you, consider a random rare with some life and resists if you're concerned, because again, there's not many on the market. Speaking of flexible options with our quiver, you can go one of two different ways. Either you can go on the offensive and take Skirmish, which not only grants us an extra ballista, but helps us with our intelligence requirements and mana sort of issues. Seriously, having an extra cannon for a single target is a big boost to DPS. Or you can grab life, resists, and crit, or even simulate an extra ballista altogether with the attractive bow attacks, fire, an additional arrow on some sort of rare quiver. But, grabbing a great rare quiver that has that mod is going to be very expensive, or that implicit, I should say. Definitely more expensive than I would recommend, but it is a way to scale even further for those with interested minds and big pockets. And coming into the last slot, which I would recommend a unique for, the chest piece. The most obvious answer for people is going to be Comb's Heart. At this point in the league, they're coming down pretty greatly in price, though they are highly sought after for that immense flat life pool. Which, with how much extra damage specifically Metamorph encounters can put out, this is a no-brainer option if you're happy with the amount of potential sockets links that you have to give up. This is just a great defensive item. A somewhat interesting alternative, though not worth the life you'd be giving up for most players, a Uriel's Fostering, specifically the Roa variant, with the buff making your companion untargetable, invincible, coming in 3.9. The buffs from this body armor are permanent, granted that you actually remember to summon them before you start running maps. The movement speed, attack speed, evasion, decent life, and amazing accuracy are what would draw you to this chest. It honestly just feels a little bit better to scoot around the map with this on than it does with Combs, both with literal movement speed and increased damage. It's something to consider, but Comb's Heart is pretty much the flat recommendation. And finally, when it comes to boots and jewelry, there aren't any especially notable uniques that I have thought of. I'm not saying that those don't exist or that you wouldn't benefit from using certain uniques. For a random example, a Karui Ward, Karui Charge is a strict damage upgrade. but with our other items listed, I believe this slot is much better served by an amulet with life, resists, and maybe even an intelligence implicit, either the combo or a standalone. So for the jewelry specifically, life and cover your resists, you have a much bigger task in trying to cover chaos resist this league, so making use of combo elemental chaos crafts where necessary. I've stuck on, I think, all 5 jewelry and boot slots. I have a cold and chaos, fire and chaos, these sorts of things, so definitely important to take care of that, and jewelry is a good place to stick it. And then, speaking of boots, I don't have any great suggestions again, but I'm recommending some options, of course. I would say to take an extra hard look at percentage chance to dodge spell hits, even if it's only 5%. It could mean the difference. I'm thinking of Metamorph encounters the most, but also tight maps with this build can become, a bit treacherous with a couple of damage mods on them. You're a bit more limited on crafting with an incursion base, of course. And again, nothing is strict here. You just want those lives, resists, and as much movement speed as you're willing to pay for. This is already a slow build, so you can either accept that a 20-25% movement speed roll in order to get a very, very cheap, good set of boots is going to be how it is. Or you can argue that you need more speed with how slow the build is and you want to pay through the nose. Either way, good luck. I grabbed some cheapos and they're serving me quite well. The one last item in air quotes that I need to mention is Rain of Splinters unique jewel. It immediately takes our 3 arrow ballistas and cranks them up to 5. And that's a 67% damage multiplier, obviously. 50% with the enchant as we go from 4 to 6, and obviously less as you obtain more projectiles. The drawback, a 30 to 50% reduced damage. And I feel like the drawback has stages of realization. First it seems big, and then you realize that it's not that big, but then you realize how insane that range actually is. The difference between 30 and 50% is upwards of 6 figures in damage, over 100,000. Which obviously is a big number, but we need to contextualize that with being able to, have a difference between like 4.3 and 4.4 million, which was an arbitrary example, not an exact DPS calculation, but it's not far off in some instances, and not extreme ones either. Getting around the average, like the 40% will only cost you around 1C, while dipping down into the low 30s will jump the price tremendously. But you can obviously kind of consider a corrupted one. If you want to go like for a 37% one, it's like 2C, but has like a cool corrupt on it. It might be something to look out for instead, something with like a crit chance or reduced mana reserve, just kind of off the top of my head examples. And the gearing took a lot longer than expected, so thanks for sticking with me so far. I think it's going to be probably a good time to start talking about gems and links. Starting with the Shrapnel Ballista, the other 5 links we'll be adding are Impale support, Brutality support, Pierce support, Vicious Projectile support, and Maim support. Each of these either gives us insane attack damage or allows the build to deliver that damage in a more effective way. Impale allows us to both get to a 100% chance to impale and increase its effect dramatically. Brutality is a huge multiplier for our damage. Pierce is at only being, a 19 or 20% more, depending on if it's 20 or 21 gem. Allows us to reach out beyond the initial target for better clear, pulling everything in tight. But even with the Pierce, enemies with the tag Allies Cannot Die are still a bit of an issue, and will require you to accurately place Ballista around these specific enemies to take them down. These pop up a lot more often, especially in Metamorph encounters, so I want to explicitly mention that. But we can't really give up without this. Even in a single target fight, something with adds is going to be troublesome. Moving on, again, we get the Vicious Projectiles is a big boost of damage, even if it does lower our attack speed, and Maim is mostly used for 30% more multiplier. Something that I would like to have a bit more testing to conclude a true result would be to swap out something like Maim for greater multiple projectiles, because on its face, GMP does more raw damage, like if you go into POB, but considering that it does not appear that tools like POB have correctly calculated the buffed armor / physical mitigation reduction percentage against hits, I would err a bit more towards the side of caution and say that we want our hits to be doing the smallest number of big hits as we can, add without less multipliers. And all of that was just a very, very messy way to say that GMP and LMP are better damage options, providing all of their projectiles hit and armor is still negligible, but that's not something that I can conclude just yet, and something to keep in mind moving forward as developments may unfold. Moving on to our other sockets, our auras, we used Pride for obvious reasons, the excellent combination of Flesh and Stone with Maim, Precision at a low level, and a War Banner. These are mostly self-explanatory. We keep Precision low because we need some accuracy, but also benefit from the crit chance that doesn't boost too much with level. We don't want to incur too great a mana reservation cost, so we get away as much mana as we can spare. So I would definitely recommend an Enlighten, if you can afford one, that is, and attach it to Pride and Flesh and Stone. It doesn't give insane mana back, as our pool is pretty small to begin with, but every little bit does help your quality of life. The other one that may stick out is War Banner instead of Dread Banner. This is because we obtain 100% Impale from the tree / gem, and increased Impale effect is lesser to our damage boost than the more accuracy and enemies taking increased damage that War Banner provides. So while Dread Banner could be used as a defensive tool, lowering, enemy accuracy, War Banner wins heavily on offense, and your discretion as always, but those are my reasons. Just to have a couple more links, we do have Flame Dash for movement, Vol Haste to help us nuke down tough metamorphs, and lastly a Frenzy setup to generate charges for our ballistas. So you're limited to just a couple links if you have a Comb's Heart. However, it's just as effective in the utility and overall DPS in this way. I have Frenzy connected to a power charge on critical support, trying to keep those up as often as possible, and you want to keep that as low of a level as you have the intelligence to maintain, obviously. And if you have any more links, such as using a Uriel's Fostering or any other rare chest, Impale allows us to 100% of the time that it hits get our bonus 1000 flat armor from Master of Metal, the Ascendancy node. An option we also have is Brutality for great raw damage, and something like Mirage Archer is good for the visualization of when you have your charges and bonus armor. It does not continue to grant extra charges, like if you hit, Frenzy once on an enemy, the Mirage Archer will not continue to grant you charges and things like this, but it is a good visualization, like I said, to kind of just know when you should be doing these things in case you just get locked up and constantly dropping ballistas every once in a while. It's good to have a reminder that you should be using Frenzy as well. And if we were to touch on Flasks just briefly, I do have a suboptimal setup myself. However, these are the ones that I've been using. A Silver Flask for Onslaught, Life Flask with a bleed removal, of course, Mana Flask with Enduring, allowing our charges to get full duration even when we tick back to full. It's important to have the Eternal one, the level 65 one, because that is the longest duration. We want to keep that up as often as we can. We have Quicksilver with Chill and Freeze removal, or Cheese, either way. And a Diamond Flask with, I have attack speed on mine, however it is much better suited to have a defensive affix instead, but of course that is viewer discretion, and we'll leave it up to you. For something like an Awakener fight, I would substitute in another Life Flask, or maybe something like an Amethyst or Sapphire Flask if I'm going for Shaper or something like that. You need to tailor it to your enemies, and they're always cheap, so do as you wish. And then lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Dying Sun. That takes your DPS up to another level, but it's pretty expensive under the circumstances, so don't feel obligated to fork over a handful of exalts. It is a luxury item and something to scale the build even further, but while active, is 33% more damage if all projectiles are hitting, and obviously that is less impactful if we have GMP or LMP instead. Just going from 6 to 8 as opposed to 10 to 12 is just less percentage. So that takes us over to the skill tree, which a POB link will be down in the description. I will talk only briefly about this here, but if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them down in the comments. Again, depending on which chest you've chosen or how much accuracy you still need, that will slightly alter this tree, but the core of the build remains the same. Because I don't really recommend leveling with the skill, it's hard to say which nodes are the most helpful early on. However, I'll offer up Point Blank, Panopticon, and Watchtowers, the last two of those giving the additional Ballista as being my top contenders. The most important topic of the tree, of course, is the Ascendancy. First Ascendancy is going to be Master of Metal, followed by an almost useless Unstoppable Hero, which is only useless until we grab Fortitude for the permanent Fortify, and lastly, snagging the Conqueror node. If you want to have some sort of melee weapon swap for Vigilant Strike, you want to take that Jewel that gives you like the 12-second base and link something crazy like increased duration, Fortify support. And I don't think I'd recommend this at all, but it is possible, so I'll bring it up. In which case you'd want to take Worthy Foe, you get the no longer have the accuracy issues and you do more damage, but the quality of life would be really sketchy, because if you're running out of Fortify, which you really always want in big fights, you would lose all of your totems at once if you had to switch out. So it's one of those things, you could do it, it would be more damage, but it wouldn't be very fun to play. That's just my opinion, of course, and that's something that you could do. However, as I recommend, Master of Metal, Unstoppable Hero, Fortitude, Conqueror. Alright, just want to jump in here because I plan on titling this video with how much damage we can actually achieve. Let's find out how much there actually is to be had. So, just kind of have these loaded up. I just imported my character as it stands right now, which they don't have any offense on their boots, rings, or belt. So this is just kind of a really basic character. I'm going to go ahead and activate the flasks that do give us damage. And I'm going to go ahead and do a lot of these things. So we have the calculator down here. And just for good measure, we're going to go ahead and take these off and just kind of show what our base damage is at a Shaper level. So 47,307 multiplied times the 30 shots that we can technically hit with for a paltry 1.4 damage. Alright, not too bad. Obviously we can make some improvements. So we're going to be getting power and frenzy charges through frenzy. We have onslaught already through our flask, which I did not re-click. We always have fortify, click it anyway. We have this for our diamond flask. Travel distance for optimal, it's going to be 10 or less, so we're going to punch in 10. This is, again, an optimal number. And in close range, because we're within 20, 10 is within 20, and we have a Chin Soul. So already, we have a extreme boost in damage, all the way up to 5 million DPS. Not bad. It's a decent start. Not quite what we plan to get up to, but we're going to go ahead and use this as a jumping off point. So this is just kind of the basic, what you've seen so far thing. I'm going to go ahead and give myself some equipment. The Dying Sun. And a Skirmish, which I would like to corrupt. This will be a pretty expensive corruption, but just kind of showing off what we can get to. An additional shot arrow. So we'll go ahead and drop that in. Get the Dying Sun up. Doesn't really affect what we're going to do. So we drop this number a little bit. We get the multiplier really cranked up. We have 147, 346 times now 6 firing 9 bolts each. 7.9 million. It's pretty good. We could do a little bit better than that if the pride is at full effect. For instance, brings us up to 111 times 54. 9.3 million. Again, we're doing pretty well for ourselves, but still we're not maxed out. We'll go ahead and plant the banner. Say we have 50 stages, which again isn't, like as likely. So we're kind of thinking this is going to get to the more ridiculous levels. And we go back to our skills and drop on Vol Haste. So we can go ahead and go 193's 369 times 54 for 10.6 million Shaper DPS. And of course, we have more. So for a very, very brief, unsustainable amount of time, if we had 50 stages on our war banner, we would have adrenaline for 2.5 seconds, which of course makes this total ridiculous. 246,873 times 54, 13.3 million Shaper DPS. Now obviously I'm not trying to say this is a reasonable number that you're always going to obtain, but when you kind of take off the Vol Haste and the planted banner and you end up with 9.3 million at like kind of full buffage, that's pretty intense, especially when reasonable buffs leave you at around 5 million sustainable damage. It's something that this has insane single target, and if you can kind of spike it like this, imagine a metamorph, which I think is like a standard boss technically, so the number would increase, but like a regular enemy with some of these things active, just calculate this really fast. 284 is 612. I missed that number. Yes, I did. 15.3 million, just regular DPS. These numbers get crazy. Obviously, there's a lot of things that you can do with the gear even. We can go in the skills. We can say that every one of these is a 21. War banner's a 21. We got 20 quality on it. What else can we do? Pride. So these numbers get pretty ridiculous. As it stands. 16.4 million. Obviously, this isn't what we're expecting to do here. But again, I want to repeat that these do not have any offensive stats on them. This is 5,500 life, but if we went to a more reasonable, let's say, Comb's Heart, we do lose more damage. And if we take off a lot of these more eccentric type of numbers, we are left with a still very significant 192,359 times 54. Over 10 million with a Comb's Heart. So, that being said, let's get you back into the conclusion and then a test map to kind of show off how it plays. There we go. So, in conclusion, with high set piece damage, a great life pool, and plenty of hit avoidance, this build is amazing for Metamorph and beyond, considering the skill was nerfed from 40% to 33% base damage before it even came out. GGG knew that they had something powerful in their hands, and now, well, you do too. So, I'll leave you with a little bit of a mapping example, but here we go. Thanks for watching, Thanks for listening. As always, be safe, guys.
Greetings, Survivor.
Spirit is spent.
We are friends now. A well-fed DPS. This is a pride. You will be a survivor. There are no more worthy beasts nearby. Will no be the ones we call.
Oh, bless. Let's see what this tower can really do. It's branching, Exile!
My spirit is spent.
You're making me nervous.
to you.